All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Believe in Bills. Adam Benigni of WGRZ TV and Sports Talk Live. Sal Maiorana, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. Look at you, man. Given the way the schedule has shifted, you're like a man of leisure these days.
Yeah, man of leisure. Just got back from downtown Rochester doing 2 hours of radio after running a Bills story this morning. Man of leisure. I wish.
It never ends, right?
No,
never ends.
It's May and we're talking about football still. Mm-hmm. So yeah, never ends.
And you know what? Ordinarily that would be, and I know people hear this and think that, we're whiny and
we are
being a pain in the ass and whatever. And people would kill for the job. And I get that. I've never lost sight of that. But under normal circumstances, especially like with this period of stability under McDermott for as long as it lasted, right? Then it would really be, there wouldn't be a lot of changes. Inevitably, there's change in the offseason. But with McDermott, you kind of knew what you were going to get. What's interesting about this set of OTAs is that we're learning about a new defensive coordinator in Jim Leonhard. And I want to focus on that because he spoke for the first time since his introductory news conference. And I do think we are finally able to learn and glean a little bit and figure out sort of the direction he's heading in as training camp approaches. So I did find what he had to say, a lot of it interesting, and I know you wrote on a lot of it at the Democrat and Chronicle. So just your impressions. Let's start out, again, I tend to like to start out wide and then zoom in. Your impressions of Leonhard himself as he's kind of evolved into the job at this point, and the scheme in general, Sal. What have we learned more in terms of what he had to say earlier this week?
Yeah, look, it was good to finally hear from him because last time he came up to the media, it was still Sean McDermott's team, right? They hadn't done anything. They just lost to the Broncos, and it's an introductory news conference, which you don't really learn much about. I really wish we had gotten him. I wish they would have made him available, at some point in free agency, but certainly, during or right after the draft would have been nice because, obviously the Bills made some picks in this draft and signed some free agents that were specifically brought in to play in Jim Leonhard's defense. So not having him talk about that for a long time was kind of a drag because all we've been doing here on these shows, in my columns, your other show, is we're just speculating about what might be in this defense. Well, finally on Tuesday, we got a chance to ask him pointed questions about a bunch of different players and, things we might be able to start, gleaning into and expecting of this defense. So it was good. And he was very good too. I appreciate that he was pretty candid. He wasn't just blowing the usual smoke. Yeah, there was, he's excited about every player and this and that, but I thought he provided some context into some of these guys that we asked him about. And it was a good session. I think he's going to be good with the media. I don't think he's a real, he's not going to be a guy that's going to blow you away with a flashy quote or anything controversial, which is, we're used to that in Buffalo. All these guys have been like that, pretty close to the vest. But I think he's going to be a guy that if you ask him a question, Adam, he'll give you a thoughtful answer. It's not going to just be the run of the mill. Yeah, we take it one day at a time. And, he's going to give you something with a little meat. So I found that to be, fairly intriguing when he finally, and again, too, but the first time he talked to us, he knew nothing about nothing. Right now, he's got a full grasp on what this roster really is and the guys they've added. So there was much more for him to chew on in this last media session, and I thought it was pretty useful for all of us.
So, and interesting in terms of his impact, right? I mean, there's going to be the guys that they've added, and we're going to learn about more specifically about what his vision is translating to the acquisition of certain players, right? But then there's also making the most of what they've already got in a new scheme. Right. And Ed Oliver probably fits that description, right? Where coming up, dealing with the injuries, obviously a former top 10 pick, the inconsistency we've seen him be absolutely dominant and at the same time disappear, right? I think inconsistency, like others, maybe a Greg Rousseau on this defense, that has done too much to define Oliver's career to this point. And of course, you hear everything's sugar-coated at this time of year. Everyone's excited. It's a change, obviously, but to hear Oliver talk about having the opportunity to play more freely, right? If anything, I've heard McDermott's defense in hindsight in the rearview mirror be criticized in a lot of ways for its sophistication. Players having to overthink certain things. And I don't know that this applies specifically to Oliver. That might be more to the secondary. But I did find it interesting to hear his enthusiasm and Leonhard talk about to be actually use that word, play more freely, because I think in Oliver's case that could translate to far greater impact.
Yeah, that was something that when I had sat down with Brandon Beane a while back, he kind of said that one of the drawbacks to the McDermott defense was the playbook was really thick. There was just a lot of information that these guys had to process and learn. And he thought maybe at times the guys played, overthinking things a little bit too much because there was so much to, as I said, process. It seems like in Leonhard's defense, he wants to be a little bit less, complicated, I guess would be a good word. Let these guys be athletes, figure out what they do best within what the context of the defense is going to be, and let them go play football. So, hopefully that's what we see out of this group. Sean's defense was good for a lot of the time that he was here. It just happened to fail at the worst moments in the postseason. But you look at a lot of those regular seasons, Adam, when Leslie Frazier was the defensive coordinator, they had some good defenses here. They failed at the wrong moments. So I think it'll be interesting to see how these guys play in this new defense. I think, to me, all the guys that they've added, Adam, aren't quite as interesting to me as the guys who are still here, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they signed free agents and drafted players knowing what they want to do in their defense, in this new defense. What's interesting is, how is he going to use the guys that are already here? Guys who have been in McDermott's defense playing a 4-3 for 3, 4, 5 years, however long they've been here. How is he going to utilize those players? And those were a lot of the guys whose names came up in the press conference. You mentioned Ed Oliver. Now, Ed Oliver is going to slide over a couple feet, and we're pretty sure he's going to be the defensive end, one of the defensive ends in the 3-man front, and that's going to be a different change for him. According to Leonhard, he really thinks that's going to free up Oliver to maybe be even more of an athlete. It should be able, because Ed's game is penetration. It's being quick, penetrating, trying to cause havoc in the backfield. He thinks that maybe by sliding out away from the center, he should be able to do more of that. So that's really an interesting point for a guy like Oliver, who, you're right, he was kind of inconsistent. When he was good, he was really good. And then, like you said, he just disappeared for too many stretches, and he has never lived up to being the number 9 overall pick. I guess it's not his fault that they picked him there, but I think he'll have a chance to maybe rewrite his own story in this new defense.
Yeah, I to hear his enthusiasm about it, again, it doesn't surprise me, but it absolutely intrigues me. And someone who they've added now to the front, I think you spent a good deal of time talking about Bradley Chubb, right? Yep. And you get the sense that Leonhard really had an influence on that acquisition, given the type of pass rusher that he is, right? Standing up versus to being a traditional defensive end in the 4-3.
Yeah, look, that was the signing that they made because on this current roster, they really didn't have a guy who's been a stand-up outside linebacker in a 3-4. Michael Hoyt did that a little bit with the Rams, but other than him, there was nobody. So Greg Rousseau has been a standard 4-3 edge rusher his whole career. Javon Solomon, if you want to include him. Bradley Chubb, this is, as Leonhard pointed out, the Broncos drafted him in the first round to be a stand-up outside linebacker in a 3-4, and he played a little bit throughout his whole career. Even at Miami, he did a little bit of that. So this is a guy who has played that position, and he comes into this team as a player, not only as a veteran guy who's had some success in the NFL, but he's a guy that someone like Greg Rousseau can look to. Michael Hoyt could even look to him. The younger guys, TJ Parker now. Hey, you've played in this defense. What are the responsibilities? Where do I have to be on this call, this and that call? I think Chubb's going to be Chubb will have a big influence. Now, whether he still has what the Bills hope he's going to have, he's 30 years old and he's had a couple, big time injuries in his career. We'll see. He was pretty good for Miami last year, so I hope that's going to be, he'll have something left to offer. Hope he's not going to be, Joey Bosa 2.0, who really didn't give the Bills much of anything. But I think Chubb was a good guy for them to get in, and he's clearly going to be a guy that Leonhard's going to lean on to help direct traffic in this new defense.
I want to stick with linebacker here and back to guys who are already on the roster. What's your sense, because there's so many questions about Terrell Bernard, right?
Yep.
And first and foremost, he's got to stay healthy. I mean, he's been through hell on the injury front. He would tell you that. Others around him in the organization would tell you that. I'm interested in Terrell Bernard's role and Dorian Williams too, right? I mean, here's a guy with an opportunity to make a very significant impact.
Yeah, Terrell. We talked to Terrell Bernard last week. I think we've talked about it on the show, and he likes this new defense because it's kind of what he did at Baylor, right? He kind of played this style of defense at Baylor. He can use his speed and athleticism a little more to get involved with blitzing. He did that his first year as a starter here. He had 6.5 sacks. He was really, utilized in a good way, even in that 4-3 defense. In this defense, he'll probably have more opportunities to rush the passer. And also, they're going to probably play a little bit more man defense than McDermott did. And with Terrell Bernard being, an undersized linebacker, which isn't always great against the run, that should be good against the pass. And I think there were times, even when he was playing well, that he sort of got lost a little bit playing zone coverage. And maybe man coverage will be a little bit better suited to his skill set as being a quick guy who's an athletic, linebacker. So that's a good thing. And, Leonhard kind of talked about that the other day. He said that Terrell Bernard's 2025 season was a complete wipeout. The guy had 4 different injuries, Adam. And, we could talk all about, he was kind of inconsistent. It's really unfair. I should never have written that if I did write it, because he was just so banged up. He couldn't play. Nobody could play with all the injuries that he had. So he's got a fresh start. He looks perfectly fine right now. And if he could stay healthy, I think he could really return to that player we saw in 23, who was all over the field, causing turnovers and everything else. He was a really good player. So I think this new defense is nice. Dorian Williams, hey, this is the opportunity of a lifetime for him, right? Yeah. He's been Matt Milano's backup for 3 years. He only played when Milano was hurt. I mean, significant playing time. He's got a golden opportunity to win a starting job in a contract year, right? Which that's important for, a guy's a 3rd round pick. If he has a really good year, teams are going to look at that and say, hey, 3rd round pick who's starting to ascend now. It's a big year for him. And I think he could be, again, that type of athlete that he is. I think he could be a nice player in this defense, but time will tell on that because he does have some inconsistency issues.
In terms of one of the other acquisitions, and this one, it didn't fly under the radar, but I don't know that as much was made of it. And maybe it had to do with, I forget the specific timing of the signing, but maybe it had to do with the Sabres coverage and all of that. But I do want to spend some time talking about and informing our viewers and listeners on Mike Dana, right? Yep. Former Kansas City Chief. Brandon Beane signs him to a 1-year deal. And this is a guy who's got a couple of Super Bowl rings, has been a big part of the problem historically for the Buffalo Bills, right? In trying to get over the top against that team and failing to do so when it mattered most. Now he joins the Bills. What does he bring to the table and what is his fit in this defense?
Yeah, I talked to him on Tuesday and I said, hey, welcome to the dark side of the rivalry. Because it has kind of been dark on this side, right? I asked him, why couldn't you guys beat the Bills in the regular season, but yet you couldn't lose to them in the postseason? He said, hey, that's the way it goes. And he did say that he coming here as a Chief, that was a tough go. He said, he said this fan base was really difficult to play in front of. So he's glad he gets the opportunity to be on this side of it. Of course, when he goes to Arrowhead at some point, it's going to be tough for him there too. He is going to be, Adam, I think, again, he's another guy that I can't quite figure out what they're going to do with him. I think they're going to want to start him out as a stand-up outside linebacker, but he has the versatility to go down into a 3-point stance, play that edge position. I think Leonhard even said at some point they've even used him in the B gap in the middle of their defensive line. So he's been a guy who's been used in a lot of different ways for the Chiefs. And I think we'll see a lot of that same thing here in Buffalo. I pulled Beane aside the other day because I wrote a story about Dana, and I pulled him aside and I said, hey, what can you tell me? And the one thing he said that really stood out to me, outside of the fact of you never want to turn down guys who have championship pedigree. Those are those are the kind of guys you want. But he said it was interesting. Sometimes the Bills, when they're evaluating players, especially on other teams, they'll look at, was this team, say it's on defense, was this defense better with this player on the field. And meaning a guy could rack up 1 million tackles and look like he's all over the field, but was the defense actually good when he was on the field? Or is he just a stat compiler? They said when they looked at Dana, he was a guy that when he's on the field, the Chiefs defense was good because he did so many different things. And you watch him play, you're always looking for Chris Jones or Nick Bolton or some of the other guys that they've had there through the years. You were never looking for Mike Dana, but it was Mike Dana who was popping up at a key moment, making a big tackle, or he had 21.5 sacks in his time with the Chiefs. He also was a 3-year starter. His first 3 years he didn't start. He was a 3-year starter for them at the end. So he said he's the kind of guy that you don't always look for him, but all of a sudden you go back and watch the tape and you're like, oh, that guy made that play and he made this play and that play. So that's what they hope they're getting with Mike Dana.
Yeah, I thought, and the more I learn about the guy and the signing and what he can bring to the table, I thought that could be a very significant high impact.
It reminds me of Shaq Thompson, right? Kind of that under the radar late free agent signing who could really have an impact on the team.
I'm interested in what's going on in the secondary and Leonhard's take there. Obviously the safety position, and really at corner, the Davidson Igbonosen draft selection, right? Kid out of Ohio State, late second round. And then what does that say about Max Hariston and his role and his fit, right? And what Leonhard actually thinks of him. I don't know how deeply he got into it, but I'm interested in anything he had to say on that front, because I think that's a key situation to watch, obviously, as we get into training camp and how that's going to evolve.
Yeah, I just wrote about it. It was a story I wrote. I think it published today. I don't even know. I forget. But I wrote about that situation. I mean, you know, when we all saw them pick Igbonosen, that's going to be a tough one, man. Yeah, that's going to be a tough name to figure. IGB might be the way to go there. When they picked him in the second round, traded up into the second round to make that pick, I think everybody, you and me and everybody else, was wondering, what does that mean for Max Hariston? Because he was a first-round pick last year from a previous coaching regime who in a previous style of defense, who also had an injury-plagued year and really, you know, the whole season was kind of sabotaged for him. He played, but, you know, he lost a lot of time. So you wonder, you know, is this the kind of player that Jim Leonhard wants to have as a starting outside corner? You look at Denver, they have big physical corners there. Surtain and Riley Moss were big physical guys. That's not Max Hariston. So when they picked Igbonosen, you're like, what does Leonhard think about Max? Well, he said Tuesday, look, we need cornerbacks. They had no depth, and he's right. Trey White's gone. Dorian Strong is probably not going to play. There was nobody on the depth chart behind Benford and Hariston, so they had to pick a corner. They picked one high in the draft, which immediately makes you think, okay, what's going on? But I think, Adam, what's going to happen here, we were there Tuesday. Igbonosen made a beautiful play, pick 6 off Josh Allen. I mean, it was a great play. Mm-hmm. I think those two are going to have a hell of a competition. Max Hariston is a first-round pick. He's not going to be given anything. And this kid, Igbonosen, is going to come in here. I think it's going to be a very, very good competition, similar to Trey White and Max Hariston before he got hurt in training camp last year. Best man's going to win. So the good news there is the loser will still be a pretty good third cornerback, we think, right? We think both of those guys can play in the league. So they'll have 3 good corners. I still think they got to add one, Adam. I think at some point, you know, maybe it's before training camp and maybe during training camp, maybe after training camp when guys get cut. I still want them to bring in a veteran corner because they're really young. I mean, you got Benford and you got these 2 kids who have no NFL pedigree. So maybe that competition isn't quite as cut and dry, but that's we'll have to see later on as they move forward here.
Well, just quality depth at that position, and
gotta have it
in the midst of the uproar coming out of the draft among the fan base, right? Listening to Brandon Beane talk about the priority he placed on cornerback and thinking about how badly, I mean, look no further back than the Denver game, how severely burned they were by lack of depth at corner and in the secondary, right?
And, like it wasn't their fault. I mean, they had a bad run of injuries. I mean, it was really unfortunate that their depth got cremated because of the injuries. I mean, he said that he even repeated this the other day. You go into last year, 2025, they were in a really good position at cornerback. He really felt good about that depth chart, and I think he had good reason to. And then, as we all saw, it just kind of fell apart little by little by little, and it all just, totally collapsed in the postseason. So he's trying, by picking Igbonosen early, you start to build some quality depth. But like I said, they're not there yet. I don't think they're there at cornerback where they can go into a season fully confident that they're well stocked at that position.
I go back to when I first arrived in Buffalo. I think I've mentioned this on the show before, but it bears repeating here. When I first arrived, and it would have been 97, right? And John Butler, God rest his soul, was the GM back then. And he was on our Sunday night show, the old Sports Extra on Sunday night. And so we had a relationship with him, and I had the opportunity to do he was very approachable, as you know and remember. Yeah. You could walk right up to him at a training camp during practice, and he would talk to you more often than not. And he would repeatedly say to me and say to us on the show or on camera and off, you cannot have enough cornerbacks. You can't. Cannot have enough good ones, and others around professional football. I'm saying this for fans who are maybe frustrated by that and want more of a splash type pick. It is emphasized, has been for decades, and especially now where it's become really a passing league, right?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that was in the late 90s. Imagine now with the advent of the passing games we see today. You sometimes you have 4 cornerbacks on the field at the same time. You need cornerbacks.
All right. Anything else you want to add? I know it was a lengthy conversation with him, and he covered a lot. Anything else that piqued your interest, or maybe you're yet to write about from that moving forward? Things that you learned from your conversation with Jim Leonhard. Yeah,
I mean, we asked him about Landon Jackson. I talked to Landon after practice too. I just wrote that story for come out Saturday morning. It was funny. He took his pads off, his jersey and helmet, and Adam, the dude, looks like a bodybuilder. I mean, his body has been transformed. He's gained 20 pounds. He wants to gain at least 5 more to get to around 285. It is a stark difference. I looked at him like, holy shit. Like, what do you got, an air thing and you're just pumping yourself up? And he said, I'm eating 5,000 calories a day. The genesis of that story is he was at 285 as a junior, dropped down to 270 as a senior, and then he got down to 260 for the combine because he knew he was going to have to be quick, fast, explosive. He had to do that. And he told me, his quote was, I trained to be a combine star. He had to do that to make sure he was going to get picked early. The Bills bit. He did do well at the combine and at his pro day, and he had a good senior season. But he said he cannot play football at 260. And we saw that last year, especially in that defense where he's playing a 4-3 defensive end. He couldn't compete, and it was noticeable. He couldn't get a game jersey to week 5, and then he got hurt pretty soon thereafter. He said he is better suited to play in the 280 to 290 range, and that's when he's at his best. That's what he did at Arkansas most of his time there, and he's really excited that they've changed, A, that they've changed defenses, and B, that now he's going to play at a weight that he feels he can really show something. And if that's the case, we forget he was a 3rd-round pick. I mean, right? We've bitched and moaned about he's been missing on some of these guys. That's a 3rd-rounder that you need to get something out of him. And I'm hoping, because he's a really good kid, I'm rooting for that kid. I'm hoping that the weight gain and the way he looks is really going to translate on the field. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And Leonhard pointed it out too. He said, that kid, he worked his ass off to get where he is right now. So that was good to see.